Namo tassa. Today I want to talk about the Vipassana itself, as far as my own experience is concerned, and basically a bit of my take on the popular Goenka Vipassana, because that's the one that I've practiced originally. So there's a little bit of my own story there, and what I think about that tradition. 13 years ago, I took my first Vipassana course in the Goenka tradition, and as it is written in the centers, Goenka makes a point to say that this is in the tradition of Ubakin. And a short info there for the people who don't know really the story. That's a little lineage, not far back actually. Just for the sake of knowledge, so Goenka's teacher was Sayagyi Ubakin in Myanmar, who created IMC, International Meditation Center. And his teacher was Sayeteji, who was a farmer across the river from Yangon, who after some events decided to go far away to try to find the meaning of all that. And he met a very good advanced monk, Ledi Sayadaw, who was from around Moiwa, more like in the northwest, west of Mandalay, in Myanmar. And I think it's a good thing if one day you feel very strongly about that practice and you want to explore Myanmar when probably the situation will get better, hopefully one day. Maybe I was lucky to go there in the right window when Aung San Suu Kyi took power and the visa got much easier to get for a longer time, and many places were more easily accessible. And I think the energy is quite good and strong at all those places. If you go to IMC in Yangon, if you go to Sayeteji Meditation Center in Kyobwe, south of Yangon, across the river, if you go to Ledi Sayadaw's cave, close to Moiwa, or the big meditation center with that big temple that got created by one disciple of him, southeast of Moiwa. And that's my main profile picture usually, where I sit in that kind of a meditation center, maybe one of the first ones of this kind, which had those little holes in the wall that's around the pool, and where people would spend the time there meditating and sleeping. And actually there's a pool in the middle. And then there's not much trace beyond that, beyond Ledi Sayadaw, who went some place to learn from, again, some people, but they are not too sure about the whole thing there. But of course, Vipassana has been handed down properly that way for a very long time. That's why people consider that Myanmar was one of the best places where the most pure Dhamma was taught and transferred from generation to generation. And as I've written somewhere, and that will go back to what's happening a little bit in Goenka organization, I think the oral tradition is the best. Exactly as I mentioned other places, that nowadays many people have access to so many information online, of course. It's all about social media and stuff. And also the different cultures in general approach the practice in different ways, actually. And maybe I will talk more later about the Goenka tradition in the West, because that's the one I know most in North America, and what affects the organization or the practice of the people there because of that cultural approach to the Dhamma and the meditation centers. So anyway, there was also one thing that made a difference, which is when people say that Sayadaw U Ba Khin met Webu Sayadaw, that famous Arahat monk, who basically validated his knowledge, understanding, and practice of Vipassana the proper way. And that, of course, is a very strong, meaningful thing in the Asian culture. And that's probably what made a difference for me, being born not at all in an Asian culture, but in France, in Europe, in somewhat a Christian context, although I would say that I was lucky that there was not a strong Christian influence on me with my family, which probably helped in some ways. And actually I was born in that time frame quite a few months after Sayadaw U Ba Khin died. And just as a reminder, of course, I was born on that full moon night of the turning of the wheel of Dhamma, Dhammacakka, in July. And also my birthday has a lot of 7 in it, and I say that 7 is a very big, important number in Buddhism, even though many don't think like that or don't realize it. So if some people are interested, we can make a little quiz and I'll let you figure out why I would say that 7 is an important number around Buddhism, and you can give me the reasons you think why 7 is important. But I found actually, of course, many signs or events or reasons why 7 is important in Buddhism. So that was the Vipassana tradition, and the main point that people make is that from Ledi Sayadaw, who was a monk, and before him, basically people would think that they would learn Vipassana mainly from the monks, learned monks, Sayadaws. Then Ledi Sayadaw gave basically or empowered Sayateji with that qualification to be able to teach proper Vipassana and the Dharma, as it is mentioned in some videos you can find about their own stories for Sayateji or Ledi Sayadaw. And at some point, Ledi Sayadaw said to his own disciples that here is this layman Sayateji who is fully qualified to teach you the proper Dhamma. And then a bit the same with Ubakin, who was basically validated by Webu Sayadaw. As we know, or for some people at least who can see and know the story, Ubakin had what we call the strong paramis. That's another big factor actually in the practice of Vipassana, and how far you can reach maybe, or at least how deep you can understand proper Dhamma, pure Dhamma, and of course your practice will be affected that way. So in Vipassana you teach about the paramis, which are the best qualities or virtues that anybody should develop during their life, also on the path to reach higher, further. So you should concentrate on developing those qualities, those paramis, in every lifetime. And of course Ubakin had very strong ones. So by practicing a little bit at the beginning and with just Anapana, he got already quite strong experiences and deeper experiences and knowledge already from the beginning, which he explained to Webu Sayadaw, and that's what made Webu Sayadaw encourage him strongly. That's already a little bit of a difference for me, coming from the West and having my first Vipassana retreat in Canada, in the West. My first retreat 13 years ago, I also had very, very strong experiences, very deep experiences, and it became very clear from that first course that the rest of my life will be dedicated to Dhamma. And there, sometimes it's a bit difficult when I explain my story when people ask, because I can mix up, either I take it chronologically from what happened earlier on in my life and then after when I started Vipassana only 13 years ago, or I put it the other way as far as things get connected, and I will try to keep it simple enough and not too long right now. But I made a video about my own story last summer on my birthday. I would say the Buddhist birthday, on the full moon day, not the date itself, the Western date. But I encountered Buddhism and the teaching of the Buddha when I was a teenager, at about 14 years old or something like this. And as soon as I opened the book that explained a bit about Dhamma, I knew that was the truth, the real way about life, and that explained clearly for me life and human society. And that is what happens sometimes when people say that you have the right strong paramis, so those qualities have been developed strongly, only by, even by yourself, opening a book, reading about the Dhamma, the basic of the Dhamma, that seed that was planted deep enough and strongly just start to develop and bloom within you. At one, it got triggered. So that's what happened, and that's when that's when I decided that okay, I'm just a Buddhist, nothing to do with Christianity anymore or anything. I mean, I never claimed to be a Christian, really. I didn't care about religion. Already I had a strong opinion on that. I don't care about any religion, and I still do, in the way that, again, many people have a misunderstanding about what Buddhism is about, and that could be another topic. Thich Nhat Hanh has a good post. I guess he may be online already before he died, about that, explaining that Buddhism is not a religion per se as such, and that's why it can help anybody, and is non-sectarian, and many Christian and Muslims and others have taken part in Vipassana before, and it has helped them. Anyway, so at the time I decided that I was Buddhist because that seemed exactly like truth after reading a little bit about Dhamma. But I was not in a Buddhist context, of course. So I started to practice meditation on my own, and the only idea that I had at the time was just sit down, close your eyes, and try to empty your mind. But actually at the time, of course, being young and not having that much experience in life, it was not difficult for me to empty my mind. Now I have to explain a little bit also of the background. Actually, what makes a big difference in one way from my path and my approach to Dhamma that way is that I come from the martial arts angle, as I say. And I think it helped a lot, exactly because I was also not lucky, because everything is karma, to practice karate in a very traditional way. So everything was very traditional, and it was the hard, strong, basic practice, which develops already a strong, disciplined mind, and you learn to focus. So my mind was already somewhat prepared for discovering the Dhamma that way. When I read about it, then it was very clear, and then the idea of meditation I had at the time was that simple, as I always say, of course, to try to keep it simple, and that's the problem, especially in that North American culture, is the worst that way, with so much intellectualization of things from those big egos, conceited egos that always think they have the means to understand at once, and they like to try to explain in the mind. But that becomes the big hindrance to the progress, which is all about letting go. And one famous thing on internet around is the unlearning, or a Rumi quote that says the greatest learning is to be able to do the unlearning of everything you think you know. But anyway, so at the time I was well prepared that way, and the idea of meditation was, okay, I just sit down, close my eyes, and empty my mind. And as much as the basic of before Vipassana, again, it's about semantics, so people learn to practice Anapana, and I mentioned in another video, you try to get Samatha. Samatha is kind of the relaxing of the mind. So you try to calm down your mind first, of course, to prepare yourself for proper Vipassana practice. Just like in the Goenka tradition, if you will see actually in the Goenka courses, one thing that is good is that everywhere the program is the same, the schedule is the same in every center, everywhere in the world. And it's always like that, actually. The first third of the course is about relaxing the mind with Anapana, and the two next third of the course are Vipassana. So first you learn to relax your mind, and for that you practice Anapana, which is focusing on the breath coming in and out. So you learn to start to focus your mind somewhere on one point, and you will learn basically to develop what we call one-pointedness. And then after that, when you actually are able to start to control your mind and focus it on one point for quite some time, then you are more fit to start Vipassana. At the time, when I was young, I didn't know better, but I found out that by myself, except that I didn't know really about the breath that way, although I was very aware of my breath, but actually I just simply, at the time, did what I call I was looking in the eyelids of my eyes. So it's kind of similar. At least that kept me focused there. And I could say that I saw a lot of things happening in one way, which is actually somewhat observing the mind. There were things happening, right? There were images of things coming up, and that's basically your mind. But then it reached a point where it turned blank, and that's basically an empty mind. So I could experience that when I was a teenager, and I started to practice meditation on my own like that, and I was doing maybe like 20-minute sessions. And yes, sometime I was sitting more in the karate position actually, but yeah, basically sometimes the body went a bit numb, but it was never a problem. So that's also another experience that people would relate to in the practice of Vipassana during the courses, especially the Goenka courses, because one major difference with many other traditions is that the Goenka course, which many find a bit scary that way, is that it's all about sitting meditation, sitting. So at the end you end up maybe sitting about 10 hours per day. Of course not in one stretch. Again, some people are a bit scared, but it's in many chunks, and ultimately at some point the longest will be 1.5 or 2 hours without moving in general, but it's up to you, of course. With the morning session being 3 hours, and you can decide to not move for 3 hours, or like they tell you when you take a break, well, you take a break and you move around, or you go to the bathroom, or you go back to your room, or whatever. And afternoon, similar, with that strong determination in the middle of it, that gives many people a break between the first 1.5 hour and then the second 1.5 hour after that. So it's up to you, but if you want, you can also sit in the hall and for 4 hours, just like that. And that's another thing that I'm so about that organization, and mainly about the attitude of some assistant teachers or teachers when they think they know, but they don't know so much. And maybe I've seen that actually, which I find a bit strange, when somebody is, I guess, serious about the practice and doing good and sitting good, but one teacher will come and tell them, don't push too hard, be careful, don't push too hard. Well, some people are already predisposed, obviously, for that practice, exactly thanks to the paramis, and the AT or teacher who doesn't have that level, that strong paramis, should ideally be able to appreciate that, but they don't. So they come and disturb actually the person who is practicing seriously like that, because they don't know better, they don't understand. And that's actually one aspect that I mean to talk about with that organization. But again, I will go back to my case, or Sayaji Ubakin and Goenka. And in general, the fact that some people have the very strong paramis from the previous life that predispose them very strongly, very ideally for that practice, for when they encounter it in their life, and then everything will go very fast, very good. And that's again another comment that I got from another ignorant 80 and some teacher who would say, well, don't try to go too fast like this. Don't just try to do so many retreats like this and just sit and sit and sit, Take it easy and like that. Again, those people don't have the capacities to see and to distinguish between a good practitioner who has already the skills and the paramis predisposing him for that. So that's why everything can go very fast. And many other ones, regular one, who, yes, would maybe make the classic mistake of pushing too much, too hard, and the wrong way. And that was the conversation I had with a teacher and senior 80 once when I had an issue with an application. And that confirms what I mean, that I think is a problem with that organization, exactly as that 80 explained. That back in the days, and I will go back to that, and especially then in Asia, it was easy to know from hearsay who was a very advanced teacher, who was a very advanced monk. And of course people would go there and they would listen, and it would be clear, because when you listen to the Dhamma talk, they know how to explain properly. But then when people would take courses, that teacher, monk or not, who was quite advanced, would actually have a bit that skills, which I have, to read people's mind pretty easily, to an extent, not every detail, but you basically can see and sense the person's psychology, main traits of character, and where they are at, and how they, what they experience when they practice and stuff like that. So then that proper teacher, a real teacher, would know how to adapt and what to say to those people, and could take care individually about these people. And that's what I've heard through some people who were studying also with Goenka. I still mean, so Goenka was the real deal that way also. He was still a real teacher, of course. It's easy to see the way he explains things, and how clear things should be. And they say that, yes, if you had anything, any question, then at the time he would explain to you properly, and it would focus and concentrate on you. It's not that you would just be one number, one student amongst others, and that's the proper teachers. So they really give you their attention at the time for your own question. Of course, we don't have much time for people who just want to joke around and just play cocky and think they know, and they try to challenge what they call the Buddhist philosophy. Again, unfortunately, in the West, there's a lot of that. That's what I referred to earlier also. That's a problem with the Western culture, because of that big conceited ego in general, and people having some education and access to information, then they think they know, or they think they have the means to know, and they like to debate and argue and challenge whatever, some knowledge in Vipassana. It's always back to the same. If you have that mindset, power to you, and take care of your own business of thinking that you know enough and you know better, and you have the means to have the means to basically argue with Dhamma. So anyway, the real teachers actually are not so many to come by, and that's what people mean. Back in the days it was easier because it was not like a huge organization, it was more local, and the teachers would know their students and they could adapt in time. Now that AT was saying, in one way true, that modern days is different, you know. Goenka organization has become so big, global, with so many teachers and ATs all over the place in different cultures. And some centers, like in the West, actually are very popular, and they see many students coming through. And so they, as such, many teachers or ATs cannot really remember you as an individual, even if you have come several times to the same center, amongst some thousands, you know, if you don't come regularly. If you respect, in one way, Goenka's advice to come once a year, and you are lucky to meet this similar AT or teacher several times, they will remember you. But that's another thing that I think is a bit not correct with that organization, the way they do things, that after you have to qualify for the long courses, the 20 days, 30 days, 45 days, etc. So you need to make an application for that. And in that application, they ask you to mention as a referral one teacher or AT who knows you well. And it was already a problem like that, because, and that's one problem with that organization, is that it became so popular, especially in some countries. So ultimately they were lacking teachers or ATs compared to how many courses, how many applicants. So they actually nominated many new ATs to try to cover that. But that's also one aspect, is that for me it's very obvious that some ATs are nominated in a hustle, like in a hurry a bit, because they need some, and obviously those people don't have much qualification. Of course the organization will say that they only nominate one person as an AT because they are ready for that, but that is very debatable in that organization now. And so, yeah, that's the difficulty now to cover the whole thing. So when you apply, and basically for me at the time I applied for my first long course, 20 days, there was no AT or teacher who would know me well, exactly because all my courses have had one different AT or teacher. So no one of them would know me well, I would say, of course, because they had seen me once in the practice. And except from my first course mainly, and maybe the second one, when everything was very clear for me that I was made for that, and my life would be about Dhamma and practicing seriously, I didn't have any questions, so I didn't interact with any AT. And again, you can see the different personalities with ATs and teachers in different courses, and some are really there for the students and they know what they talk about, to an extent, but some other ones are maybe freshly nominated as AT, and then you can feel that they're a bit insecure and they don't want to spend too much time in the hall or talking to the students. Again, that's the problem with such an organization and popularity that has so many courses but don't have so many really advanced, qualified teachers. And that, I think, is a definitely negative side by itself, and that creates also that reaction that I've heard many times from students who got discouraged actually in that practice, exactly because they felt that they were not heard or listened to properly by some ATs and teachers, which is one way. And we unfortunately have to deal sometimes with some really arrogant, conceited, condescending ATs or teachers, which is why it makes you wonder how the nomination process works. But I mean, I know sometimes, unfortunately, I give an example also. Sometimes you have somebody who has been an AT for a while or a teacher, and they have a partner, and the partner, of course, start to practice, and so they will try to make the partner become also an AT so they can teach together, basically go to courses together. And sometimes they will rush the nomination of that partner to become AT for that sake of that, so that they can be together in teaching. But after that, it is very, very obvious the difference of level, the difference of skill in sharing the Dhamma, sharing the teaching, or responding to questions. But that's just the way it is again. I mean, I could say that ultimately, actually, when you go to a Goenka course and practice, you shouldn't have too many questions. Of course, always people have many questions. But the point is that if you practice properly, the way you are taught, and exactly the way it is meant to be, the point is to learn to let go. And as I mentioned earlier, that Western mind with a minimum of education and so much access to information everywhere, and the way the culture goes with so much ego and conceit, they really like to try to figure out things like in a deep arguing way or debating way. And that again becomes too much an intellectual game for their ego, because they think they can know better, and that of course becomes a hindrance to the practice, as I meant earlier, and the people don't really manage to practice properly, which is again basically a general let go. And whatever happens, it comes in your mind. So, of course, there are many kinds of reaction, and I see the difference. Some people have strong emotional reaction during some courses, and actually they also do for some in the East, in Asia. But again, the teachers deal with that in very, very different ways because of cultural habits. But ultimately you have to understand that anything that happens, and the point of this whole practice is about discovering yourself. It's an introspection deep within yourself, deep within your mind. So whatever comes up, nobody is guilty or responsible for that. It's all within yourself or within your mind. The point is just it's like a very strong psychotherapy, of course, or psychoanalysis. And so it's just about digging down within your own nature and the nature of the mind, and anything that will come up, any physically or mentally, is you, is within you, was already within you the whole time, but you were not really aware of. And at the same time, you are taught the secret key, which is upekkha. And upekkha means like this, that surrender, acceptance, neutral acceptance of what is for what it is, yatha bhuta. So if you can focus on that, which is the real key to success, then things will be fine enough in a way that you just don't let your mind go too crazy to react strongly to whatever shows up, emotionally or physically. That goes back to something that also I want to touch upon, again with that organization, that would explain why some ATs or teachers have an attitude which is definitely not conducive to Dhamma. Actually, they are very adhamma for some of them. And they have that very arrogant, condescending, conceited attitude, as conceit is, of course, one of the big fetters, one of the last ones to get rid of. So it's part of the human mind in general. But what I want to say around that, and for the people in general, again, don't put those teachers in a pedestal. Most of them are not very advanced. They are not very high level. They have practiced a few years, but yes, they are not like super high level. And that's again one word that once I had an argument with a freshly nominated AT, a young AT still full of ego and conceit. And that's also about the process to be nominated as AT in that Goenka organization. When he said, it's not a question of level, it's about serving, and serving the people and serious practice or whatever. So first of all, yes, you have to know in this organization, of course, you learn that you have to take anyway first a 10-day course, and then you can apply for maybe a shorter one. Many people wish they had a shorter one first to get a taste of it, like a 3-day weekend or something. But no, in the Goenka tradition, you do 10-day first. Then you can actually do a 3-day course. And at the same time, that's also how you are allowed to serve a course. And serving a course means mainly, of course, most of the time that you will be in the kitchen to prepare the meals for the students. And then you will help also with a few of the tasks in between, or at the beginning, at the end. So it's about serving. Then you have to understand that in this organization, they make a big point of you developing that serving mind. And they have, I guess, their own understanding from what Goenka said and their own opinion on that, of developing the serving mind that way. But at the end, basically, some students, maybe they think, oh, how could I become a Goenka 80 or one day? Well, basically, like they mean you will have to serve a lot, and you will have to see some higher ones, senior 80s or teachers, see you around a few times. That becomes the people who know you well, and that you have served a lot. But that I have a meaning about that, because that's what creates those situations where you have those 80s who become such exactly because they served a lot, they showed up a lot, they served a few courses, and they of course tried the different ways. So you can become a course manager one day, or you are asked to become a course manager one day, or like that you show up in other working periods, or whatever, you show up in between a lot. And so they see you around a lot, and then they consider that you have developed that real serving mindset. That is what they want to see to make you an 80. But that, unfortunately, doesn't have much to do at all with your proper level of understanding, and exactly, I use that word, the level of Dhamma, of Vipassana, what level you have reached. And for me, it is very clear when I see any AT or teacher where they are at as far as properly understanding and their own practice of Dhamma. Exactly Dhamma itself, which is not the same as serving courses. It's easy to go to courses and serve them and to spend time serving, but your proper understanding and how deep your practice of Dhamma is something different, and it's not directly connected. But this organization likes to emphasize on the serving part, and that's how you get nominated. But then we end up in those situations, as I meant earlier, where you have many ATs replying to some questions that students have, and you can see that they're not confident, and sometimes they don't really know what they talk about. But the point again with that organization, as Goenka meant back then, which is understandable, that they wanted to make a standard. So to become an AT, you read that book or pamphlet for ATs, and basically for the classic questions, which are many of them, of course, that most students will go through, and then many students will ask, basically go through the similar thing and thus ask similar question. There is a standard answer to give the student. So those ATs have to learn that. But then again, depending how strong is the understanding of Dhamma, they will feel very confident in their answers and they can give a little touch. But again, understand that Goenka originally made a standard because when he had his first ATs and teachers, then some of them started to really have their own personal input, and they started to change something, and he noticed that it was not really what he meant as the way that Dhamma should be taught, and that he think it was not correct. That's why he stopped that and asked all the ATs in the future to not have too much of their own input, which is again what creates those situations now in the courses when you talk to some teachers. Because, and as many students told me, and that's how they felt discouraged, it's like, I don't bother anymore to ask any question anyway, because I know what the answer will be, and it will be the standard answer. They just repeat it like robots anyway. So you feel not really taken care of. And yes, that's unfortunately a lot of experience like that. And as much as I say that if you actually practice properly, you shouldn't have any questions, basically, because Goenka, of course, being the real deal himself, as it is always, he explains it very well. But then the typical mind, the ego, always likes to, the monkey mind always go so many directions and start to reflect on things and wonder and this and that and that and that. But as I said, and it is very clear and simple, in the practice, as you learn about upekkha, equanimity, which is the key to success, and understand that anything that you go through is within you, is part of you, and that's just how it is. And if you can accept that for what it is, that is the practice. So just let it be like that. And there are some famous things. Famous quote is also that these two shall pass, and yes, there is a lot of that, which is anicca also. So whatever you go through, just be equanimous about it, and understand it's the reality as it is in that moment, and that's part of you, that's within you, and that also will go away at some point. So there's no real question to have except to practice that, which is the real Vipassana practice, objectively. But then what I wanted to say is that also, for example, I was talking about the level, again, and maybe many ATs or teachers don't agree with using that word, but that's what I mean. For me, being very traditional, being aware now of all the parameters that I had, why I was meant to be successful on the path that way, I can see, of course, which ones have similar skills and parami, and the rest who are just trying to do their thing. But then there is the story again when you listen. Goenka first, after some time, nominated 8 first ATs or teachers. I don't know if they call them teachers or ATs at the time. Some Indians, so Asian, and some Westerners, North Americans. And actually, again, you can see the difference. Some of them, very, already aware of what they have inside them. So basically, there is he nominated one first AT or teacher, Bill Hart. And for me, I saw Bill Hart a couple of times in video or at Damagiri, and I can see why. Obviously, he could be nominated as the first AT. I can see why he has the parami already inside him, and why he could be the real, proper Dhamma teacher that way. But then you listen to some interview where he speaks, and he mentioned already back then that suddenly some other people who were studying at the same time as him with Goenka, there was some kind of little bit of jealousy already, a bit of, why did he get nominated 80 already, him, and why not me, why not whatever. So again, that shows already that Western mentality that I'm talking about, and the ego and the conceit in general. And even if you're supposed to, as a Dhamma practitioner, let go of that and not being affected, well, it's obviously very present because it was already something that happened from the beginning. And it's always the same, as I would say sometimes as an example in some situation, that whatever organization, or it can be some corporation, what became very famous companies or corporation or organization in that sense, there's always the original guy, the main guy. He had it in him. Again, it was his karma. It was meant to be. So he had the drive, the proper drive with the faith, and he knew what he was doing, and he developed the whole thing. And then because it becomes bigger and bigger, then you need to have a few people starting to help or to delegate to, and they're supposed to carry on the same organization mindset or corporation practice or whatever. But then it's exactly again just like back in the days when you had the higher monks who created a very famous monastery, a big monastery, because he was a very developed monk. And then he had a few under him that were already, quite good, like say this Lady Sayadaw and his disciple who created that huge center. But then it goes down over time, and usually going down is also, filtering down, and later on, or going a few level down, it's never the same like the original product, the original main guy who started the whole thing. So this organization is no different than any others that way, because they are still humans, most of them. I mean, a few of them, and supposedly some of the original would be Arya, because they are supposed to have had a first dip for some of them or more. But basically that's what I mean to say, that again, in this organization, only very few teachers are real teachers in that sense, that they have the really high level, maybe some are Arya, potentially, and then they really know very well what they talk about, and then they will really know how to answer properly each student with the right focus and attention, compared to most of the other ATs and teachers who, have served a lot, have practiced a lot, and they know how to respond the way they were told to respond to students for standard questions and everything, but it's not the same. And that's the way this organization works. I would say, unfortunately, in one side, there is that. So yeah, people can say, what can we do? Well, when this organization is so big and there are so many centers and we need to have enough ATs, well, maybe that's the problem, to develop so many centers with so many unqualified ATs, maybe I would say, and rather, again, concentrate on bigger centers, because you can see that many centers are created, again, out of the motivation of some people, yes, and they have the money, so they can, and they gather together and they set up a center, but then they struggle already in the way they set up the center, and you can see that karma is already showing them, actually, that it's not going to be easy, and maybe that's not the best way, but yeah, again, they have the drive and they mean to do it, but the way some centers are started, or they start and they stop and they go somewhere else or whatever, it's already like a sign of, it's too much messy, right? But why not having a big center? Yes, it's more distance for some people, but if people have, again, in themselves the drive and the motivation, they will go to those centers. Big center with a very established, proper teacher, and then a few assistants, basically, that also are qualified. And that's actually more, again, like in the Asian way. So that's one aspect of what's happening with that organization. And also, I want to touch on another maybe sensitive topic that might get me some backlash, but again, it's about objectivity and speaking things as they are. Just like with Dhamma, the way you should approach your own self-discovery. So, to correlate with what I was saying, in the application, they ask the student about their mental shape, mental state. And again, how objective can people be about saying that they are fit mentally for Vipassana or not? But of course, they mainly also mean if you have had already some serious mental issues, or you have been diagnosed officially in the mainstream psychology thing, which is another debate. But anyway, I mentioned that somewhere else. You should mention it. So basically, they ask you about your mental shape, mental state. See if you are fit to take a Vipassana course. And that also, of course, typically in North America, has to do with, again, that culture of legal matters, and how, especially in America, people like to sue each other for whatever, as a mental disease, actually, at that level, when only in America you find that madness of how much people like to sue each other for whatever reason, and for their own mistakes, actually, for their own mental insanity. But anyway, so in Vipassana, Goenka Vipassana application, you are supposed to Yeah, in Goenka Vipassana organization, you apply for the course, and there is that part about your mental health, and you have to mention things about that. But okay, that's fine for that part, of course, that makes sense. And if people are objective and they had some issues, then an AT or teacher will talk to them to see if they can be fit or not. I mean, yeah, there has been some issues, and there are a couple famous cases. But again, I'm not going into details about that, even though that, again, is a lot of nonsense around that. But yes, one girl committing suicide, that they want to link to that and whatever. But again, it's that situation when people will take one example or one or two or three events out of hundreds of thousands, and it will become the sensational thing to pinpoint on, to use as an argument for the whole thing, which again shows the insanity of that mentality, especially in that country, in America, actually. Just to say it bluntly. In Asia, they deal, with things more realistically like that, not with that bad mindset, and just more hands-on with the reality of life. Anyway, so just to say that you as a student, every time you are asked about your mental health in your application for the course, even for longer course, and also you are supposed to mention if you have had this event or that event in your life lately, even if you have practiced already a few years. And then they will decide again, just going by the rule, very narrow-mindedly. Okay, you have broken up with your long-time girlfriend. Okay, so maybe you should wait, or maybe you should not. They just apply blindly some rules like this. They don't know better. They don't know if you actually can handle things much better than themselves, than the AT or the teacher you talk to or not. But what I want to say is, on the other hand, I have come to know, because I was always interested in the science of the mind and psychology, and I wanted to become a psychoanalyst a long time ago. But again, I understood that there was the academic way is not the real way, actually the proper way. And becoming a life coach, again, that became the trend at the same time as I moved to Canada, and that's the thing I looked into. And then I took a few courses and things, and again, it had to become the whole certification, as that Western system loves it. The whole, you have to be certified this and that, which has nothing to do with actually the proper level of understanding of from the people, but they have studied it, they have repeated what they have been told in the school, and they put it back on paper the way it was supposed to, so they get certified, which is totally different from having the proper skills. And this is something I became aware of already when I was younger, and when I started university and wanted to become a psychoanalyst. I understood that that's the way it works, and that's not the real deal for me. So that's why I went on with something else. But anyway, but I came to know a few people in that field of psychotherapy, life coaching, and whatever other names that have become very popular now. I made another video about that now, because everybody is self-entitled now, and that's the other problem with the North American culture, that there's not so much professionalism anymore, both ways, even with the people who got certified, but only because, they did well at the exam to repeat what they have learned, but not because they have actually the real skills inside. And then there is the other kind of the new age mentality of self-entitlement, and people decide that they would like to be that, so they just decide that they are that, and they define themselves by this way, by this word, even if they never really studied properly or practiced, And that's why you have seen that increase of so many names, label of whatever aspect around the whole, now you can call it like self-care practice, because, try to find one word that includes all those so-called practices, from more original, legitimate, as it was originally simply called psychology, so psychologist, then became psychotherapist, psychiatrist, and psychoanalysis developed later on. And then the whole, already like exactly like that way, maybe the same way as I felt at the time that I didn't trust in that regular academic psychology study curriculum, which again, if you look who created that, will tell you enough. And that goes back to that one quote that I mentioned before that I think is one of the best ever quote by a very advanced sage, as Goenka mentioned himself, that he has a very high respect for this man, which is who is Krishnamurti. And one of these famous quote is that it is no sign of health, you can understand mental health, to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. And that's basically what defines this society, especially North American culture. And even the people who practice psychotherapy, psychiatry, psychoanalysis, I would definitely say that many of them have some serious unresolved issues. But again, they justify it, right? They just because they studied, they are certified, and they are here to help others, and that's why they still keep on seeing a therapist themselves. Blah 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 blah. This whole justification, which is basically big BS, big ego conceited nonsense about how skilled you are to actually help others and to know properly about psychology or psychotherapy. Yes, you know the theory of it as far as categories and statistics have been made of so many pathologies that people have, so you know about that, but that doesn't grant you any real skills about how you can really deal with that within you and within others properly. But that follows an academic curriculum that has actually a certain goal, and the certain goal is to make you fit in that insane society, actually. That's basically the point of the modern psychology. And that's why it has not a very strong value in the grand scheme of things in life in general, and the Dhamma actually, because it's not with the right intention originally, the way modern psychology has been made to become and to be about. But it's working, obviously. That's why the world is in this shape now, and again on the verge of a big collapse. Exactly because of the entitlement of people who have some very serious psychological issues. And that is to say that I know some people who work in those fields, and they have as clients some Goenka Vipassana ATs and teachers. And basically, they tell me that they see that, those ATs and teachers from Goenka organization who go to them confess that they have a lot of issues, a lot of mental issues or problem, or they have a hard time to deal with their own life, of course, and also with students during the courses. So again, that, yes, takes away the legitimacy of what's happening in that organization now, because first you will have some people, you have the application where you have to tell if you have some mental issues to take a Vipassana course. And then if you dare to mention even the slightest thing, then you will have to meet with, I don't know how psychologically competent an AT or teacher is to see if you are fit to take the course or not because of your psychology. But then actually many of those ATs and teachers have their own serious psychological issues. So that explains basically certain things and certain situations that I've witnessed and that I've heard a lot about from students, and that's why it makes many students discouraged after the first course and not coming back. And also, again, I can talk about the different cultures. So that way, again, as I meant, that's just how it is, because an organization becomes too big and the original guy, the founder, he's gone. And then, of course, down the line, down the levels, well, it starts to become, a bit of a shadow of what it was supposed to be originally and what it was. So, of course, it's very popular because it's still Dhamma, and Ubakin and Goenka gave the energy, the metta to that. But again, there is that reality, practical reality. And then that's why you have the Goenka organization in India per se, as you can separate from Southeast Asia, which is again different culture, right? India, Hindu culture, different from Southeast Asian, proper original Vipassana in Myanmar or Sri Lanka or Thailand. Then it becomes a bit different, of course, for the Mahayana tradition and culture, like in Vietnam or Japan. And then you have the West, because still, of course, there were those original first 80s or teachers with Goenka back in the days, on that first wave of Westerners discovering the Eastern spirituality. And then they brought it back with the right intention. They felt strongly in them. They probably had very strong experience, and they decided, wow, yeah, we need to bring Vipassana to the West and to North America or Europe. And then they started it. But then, again, it goes down and down and down, like over time, just the same, like, there was Buddha, and then there were some first original, of course, very advanced disciples, and then it goes down and down and down and down. And just as I explained in another video, that's how they start to make new rules and more rules, and for the monks, the Vinaya, and in general for the practice, and new theories and the commentaries under each discourse. And then you can see that it's just, typically going down and down as it developed, of course, to more and more and more and more people. And in one way, more and more people think they know and they understand, but only very few are actually meant by the karma, by the parami, to properly understand and thus transfer and reshare properly the original, pure teaching Dhamma. So that is also to give my take on Goenka Vipassana organization now. I probably forget because there were a few things, so many things and many examples to give, but the one thing that I want to say compared to what I just said is Goenka was the real deal. Again, there are many, of course, critics, many people, and again, I know some Westerners, young Westerners who took some Vipassana Goenka, and yes, they was disappointed, but actually maybe because of the attitude of an 80, not because of the proper teaching themselves, and then they went to another place, and then they start to criticize the Goenka tradition because of this or that and that. I actually became aware now of some previous senior 80 in the organization who has left the organization. And I know that person because that's also one I talked to about, certain issues there, and compared to the old days when they were a proper teacher who knew everybody that he was teaching to and could adapt his teaching properly. But, and that previous 80, who again, has a higher social status in one way, like, when people, there are many doctors and whatever lawyers maybe in that organization and stuff, and again, that's the whole BS of the North American culture of those people who pretend to know so much about Dhamma, but they still like to put the initials after the name because, it's all the North American culture like that. Conceited show-off, ego, right? I am MD, I am MSc, I am this and that. But nothing to do with Dhamma, of course. But these people have a high opinion of themselves, and because they have practiced a long time and they mean to understand and they like to study the brain and the mind or psychology or whatever. And so then they, but then now some person like that have decided to create a separate group outside of the Goenka organization, of course, as leaving that Goenka organization, to figure out what is wrong with the Goenka teaching or the Goenka organization. So, I mean, I just, got told something, so I'm not gonna dwell too much into that, but I mean, there are two different things. If you want to say what is wrong with the organization, obviously there are many wrong things because it has become such a huge organization in so many places of the world and trying to adapt to different cultures. What I meant to say earlier, for example, is that once I talked, of course, to more 80s in North America, and then I get to hear, but in Asia they like to do it like that way. They want to do it that way, but here we do it this way. So already, of course, there was one guy who tried to standardize things to make it the proper Dhamma, and already later on, so many egos in both cultures, Asian, North American, whatever, they start to think, no, we need to do it this way. No, we're gonna, they think they understand so well. So that creates, of course, all these problems. So that's part of the organization, organization side. On the other hand, I was told in a way of that this group want to say what is wrong with Goenka's teaching. But what I want to say in general, after exposing some negative aspect of that organization, and we will see if I get backlash from that or not, from them, basically, that will tell about objectivity or not, because, you can see some videos online where people consider Goenka Vipassana like a cult, and as I meant, sometimes the behavior of some 80s is a bit too much on the, and especially towards serious students like me, what I've experienced myself is too much of a fathering and condescending attitude, that they think they know everything better anyway and the way it should be, and that's the way it is, and that's it. Very close-minded, and I can see that these people don't understand properly Dhamma, of course, but anyway. But I mean, Goenka himself was the real deal still, and you can feel it. If you have the paramis, you can feel it anyway. Just the same like Ubakin. Again, Ubakin was different, and as Goenka explained, because Ubakin was very busy indeed with his everyday life, and he could only teach to a few people at a time, and he was selective to the kind of student he was teaching to, as he made the vow to have only very already developed students, which can be it can mean developmentally, as it is said that would have already a really strong paramis within them, so they would reach a higher level very quick, understand very quick Dhamma properly, and reach higher quick. And that happened. That's why it is famous. People say that many of his students would experience Nibbana, become Arya. But that's different. And then the point with Goenka was to spread it as wide as possible. And that's, again, another way that I was told sometime, in a way that I think is not a good sign for that organization where it's at, and by some 80. And some 80, they say, that's why people call Goenka Vipassana the Walmart of Vipassana. So, and that's from 80s saying that. And then on the other hand, as I meant, I've met some 80 or teachers, real teachers in the Goenka organization that I consider real like that. You can see, I mentioned, of course, Bill Hart as being the first one, and you can see why. He was meant for that, of course, to understand properly. And so he, when you have really the paramis and you're aware of it, and it's done. That's your life. Dhamma is your life. And then some teachers I met, I can see also they are advanced, very high, proper teacher. And then I I talked to some other 80, like regular 80s, and then I mentioned this name of these people without saying, I think they are very advanced, but I mentioned just the name because I met them. And then that 80s response would be, oh yeah, those, they are the very serious one, in a sarcastic way. So within the organization, these people are 80s, they are supposed to conduct courses, and they will tell you, yes, when you sit on that chair, on that dais, you feel the energy, you feel something, yes. But then, they don't carry on the proper Dhamma, Vipassana mindset in their everyday life at all. And then they go back to the very human way, and, with the ego and the conceit, but to the point that you meet them outside in everyday life and you talk about and then they would mention something like that. They would say, oh yeah, but these 80s or teachers are, they're the very serious one, like this. Like in a way that, you actually are speaking in a demeaning manner towards your own colleagues, like in the organization, because they are actually very serious, because they are actually the real deal. So who is speaking at that time? Of course, the conceited ego that has some jealousy, or loba dosa, classic, of course, as any regular human. But again, to say that in this organization there is pros and cons, of course, like anywhere. But I want to say that if you mean to know about proper meditation, really, and Vipassana, and being the real deal, I think Goenka is the real deal, and then I would say it worked for me. But of course, over time, exactly after my first retreat and after learning more and more, and because I had it in me, I had the motivation to understand more, like to read more about things and to watch more documentaries and everything. Then I understand more about my own story, my own nature, but also my own history of why I started like that when I was a teenager, and my previous lives and the paramis and everything. So for me, again, I think Goenka is the real deal. And again, if you have it in you, it will really trigger that strong seed within you. Then the other thing I want to say, and that's again another aspect, but maybe it goes back to what I mentioned just before. And actually, lately I saw an article again about what it is said about Ubakin and what Ubakin said to Goenka and everything. So actually, in one way, Ubakin told Goenka that he has to spread Dhamma, go back to India first, where the Buddha started, that was the main point, and then it spread to the world, to the many. So somebody would say, okay, Goenka Vipassana is the Walmart of Vipassana, and maybe not so serious. And then I explained earlier that actually to become an AT or a teacher in that organization, it's mostly about serving, how much you serve, how much you show that you're dedicated to serving, but maybe not how good you are at understanding Dhamma and how advanced you are as far as a higher level, actually. Then, exactly from my own experience, as I mentioned before, I've had to deal with some attitude, definitely from some ATs or teachers. A conceited, arrogant, condescending attitude. Exactly because their conceited ego feels triggered by seeing a very, very serious student who can reach so high and so quick. And then they become to have a demeaning speech towards that, which is very surprising because, again, if you listen to Goenka and what it is, you want to reach higher, of course. If you can reach higher, again, I'm talking about level, exactly. It's not about serving, it's about the level you reach as far as on the path and how much you understand Dhamma. Then you should be happy and you should have supportive teachers, properly as a proper teacher, should be very supportive on your path to see that you are very serious, that if you are eager but in a good way. Again, I was told by one of those ATs, don't be too eager. Like, sorry, I have it in me and I feel that I want to practice a lot, seriously. I like to practice a lot on my own. Be careful, practicing on your own can be dangerous, blah, 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 the whole thing again. that those 80s, they don't know better, right? They just repeat the standard answers, but they don't know how to see within you that you are really meant for that, of course, because they are not themselves. So then there is some kind of demeaning attitude towards the people who reach very high and especially very quick, and from those ignorant 80s basically, or teachers, because of course ignorance is still the best. Ignorance is the last fetter to get rid of, to become arahat actually. So yeah, that's the biggest one, and so I can use that word properly. So again, there was an interview I saw once of one of the original teachers from Goenka, who is in California, and they were talking about that, and exactly at some point he mentions exactly one of these kind of students, I think, because in the afternoon, if you want, as I said, and again, if you have it in you, you are in it, you practice properly, so you can sit long time properly, not pushing the wrong way, but you sit with the proper mindset, practicing properly as Goenka instructed for a long period of time. So the afternoon session, you can make it 4 hours if you want, between 1 and 5, right? The classic schedule. And then he was saying, oh yeah, there was that girl I saw once, and she went for 4 hours like that. And I think when he says she went, he means, yes, she was deep. Maybe, I don't know if he's actually Arya anymore, but maybe he had the one, anyway. Maybe he meant she went like, it looked like she was really in it, definitely probably in the jhanas or higher jhanas, if not more, and that's why she just went, as he meant, maybe, I think that's what he meant, for 4 hours like that. And that would be normal for a very advanced student who have already the paramis, even if it's early on in the practice of Vipassana, because they have the right paramis. And then the interviewer says, oh, and what happened to this girl after? He said, oh, I don't know where she went. And what I think, what I can see, and also after talking to a few people, is that some students who are meant to reach very far, very high, because of the paramis, and their life makes them practice through that organization, they seem to leave it, sooner or later. I think exactly because you feel that you don't have the proper support from proper teachers who can recognize that and support that, as they do so much in the Asian culture, of course. And that's what I meant. Well, I can go, of course, back to that. But yeah, if I was born in Asian culture, the support would have been very clear at once when you reach certain level, and then everything is done to support you in the right direction. But anyway, that's the Asian way, of course, because they are already Buddhist, and they can recognize that early, and then they definitely will support you totally. While in the West, typically again with that Western ego and conceit, and in that organization with some unaware, ignorant, conceited, arrogant, condescending teachers or 80s, it's the other way. And I had the one event on my path where I felt that, I knew already I was meant for that. That's why I was going for the longer courses, of course, so quick. And again, I was told, oh, you go so quick for the longer courses. Yes, I have it in me. I know it. My life is about Dhamma. That's all. Don't be jealous. Don't start to be demeaning about that. And then one teacher basically hindered not my progress in one way, but my development on the path by exactly trying to block that. And he's a teacher, supposedly. So that's what I mean. That's my experience. Then, of course, it discourages also people who reach higher level to keep going in that organization because of that ignorance from even teachers who have the power to decide about people's application or people's practice, and again many many people can think that there's no point to stick around, and ultimately what I want to say, that's why I think this organization loses really the potential to keep very serious advanced potential ATs or teachers. Again, as I meant earlier, the criteria they use mainly to nominate ATs, and then also the attitude you can get from some when you are actually practicing so seriously that you seem too eager or too fast, too quick to those ignorant ATs and teachers. Then that makes you, of course, feel like, okay, well, I better go somewhere else where I can be appreciated properly, objectively, without an ego-based arrogance or condescendence. And of course, in Asia, you meet more advanced general teachers. And of course, it's not only in the Goenka tradition, but again, if you meet some really advanced Vipassana practitioner, teachers or monks, mostly because that's Asia, a bit by tradition, it's like that. But they will recognize at once and definitely will support you, and you will get the support of the people. So again, I don't know if there is a point in that organization to basically trying to get rid of a newer, really advanced student that could be ATs or teachers. I'm not, again, mentioning anything about a wish. It's not that. I'm doing fine where I am, but I just want to take a different, to give a different take than I see online for all the people, of course, who post their own take on the Vipassana course, whether it's a first time Vipassana or they have been doing it for a long time. But of course, there are more and more videos online, and that's why you feel from the organization that there's more and more wariness, and they are a bit more and more tiptoeing with things, and that's why they also can backlash easily. I know a few people who have been kicked out of the organization only because, they dared to criticize a few things. And so, anyway, and that tells enough. So, and some other aspects I want to talk about, which are more linked to that North American culture, exactly compared to the Asian one. So in Asia, you can see, of course, because of the culture, that there is no problem to find servers to help at any given course. And actually, it's more like being in a culture that they have kind of full-time servers, not only as managers, like in the management, like they ask to in the West, but also like kitchen servers. Usually there's kind of a dedicated kitchen staff anyway who stay there. And they are happy to do so exactly because they understand, of course, the basics of Dhamma and Dana that way. And of course, they want to serve a meditation center for their own paramis too. But that's very much anchored in their culture, so it's not difficult. And my point is more compared to North America, where, as I mentioned before, the mentality is quite different, and there's also maybe a difference in general, let's say, between USA and Canada. But at the end, it's still that culture, as I meant, that has a lot of ego and conceit and pride and that way. And of course, you will hear many people and 80s, and as they would say, Goenka means that it's good to serve, to serve courses exactly to develop your equanimity and basically dropping your ego in a sense that you have to put up with other people with personalities and characters like that. But again, I think that got a little twisted in the way of what's happening in reality. Also from my own experience, that yes, you could say that that's all right to have that little challenge of equanimity, to put up with different personalities. The problem is typically in that culture, and that will relate to the other point that I will make later that might not be popular at all, of course, nowadays, which goes also with the woke culture and what this North American society has become, and it has become what it is now exactly because of that. And basically, I just wished I didn't see that much entering the Dhamma world and the so-called Vipassana centers, because that mentality is totally at the opposite of Dhamma. But it seems that some people, some teachers, ATs, or maybe other influential people from other organizations try to sneak in that woke mentality into the Vipassana centers and so-called Dhamma places, which become Adhamma exactly because of that. So, again, compared to Asia, when you are in that context, and Goenka says, and as I meant, they emphasize a lot on serving to maybe become a teacher one day, or 80 anyway. You should really keep the Dhamma spirit, right, in the kitchen, as a server. And you get that specific little discourse for Dhamma servers. But that's the point. You are still in a Dhamma center, Vipassana center, and you should have that mindset. But from experience, and of course what I've heard many times, that's not really the case in the West. Then still a lot of people bring the ego, the typical conceit and emotional needs or whatever, mental issues in that context of servers. And on one side you have the ones with their own really real issues who want to try to serve, but actually it becomes a very difficult time for them compared to their own issues, exactly because of the other side, where typically in that culture some people have maybe a job outside which is about managing or whatever in that psychology field or whatever they think they are, but they bring that very strong conceited ego in the Dhamma place, in the kitchen, and of course many of them, they like to become the kitchen manager for the time being, so they can satisfy to their very controlling issues, to their very bossy issue. And that creates actually not a very conducive atmosphere for proper Dhamma, as far as a real community sense and everybody helping each other and stuff. Anyway, so, and then the consequence is, of course, that you see many centers always send messages that they are lacking some servers for the upcoming courses. And there's no surprise about that. So, at the same time, as I mentioned before, everything being karma, depending on the center teacher and the management at the time and everything, again, basically the center and those situations with servers will reflect actually the energy of the management or the center teacher. So if you have struggled to get your center running properly and have enough regularly some servers and stuff, then maybe you should look objectively at some things and to try to change some. I mean, if you realize what's happening, you make the changes. And then exactly that way, people should really keep the mind of Dhamma, being humble and only exactly being there to serve and help each other. Only that mindset, exactly a place to learn to really focus on the 4 Brahma Viharas, and as the expression goes, try to leave your ego at the gate. But in reality, of course, especially in that culture and the way it has evolved lately with the woke movement and the woke culture, it has gone the other direction, exactly as society goes. And that's my other point, that again, Dhamma is Dhamma and Vipassana is Vipassana, and it's there to teach you some discipline, mind discipline, and some awareness of your own defilements. So you are not here in a center to bring in your own ideas and concept of whatever values you have about life and try to force them or push them on others, and try to ask people to adapt to you like this. That's the point. You learn to humble down and to adapt to something different, and actually to be very simple. But again, there are some people who exactly in that society, in that culture, feel so entitled as it is now, as you can see many videos of whatever happens in society, events. And that sense of an entitlement of the very degenerate humans, actually, people with some serious mental issues, and they still bring that anywhere they go. But that is to say, and once I saw, of course, of course I'm going to mention some things, not going too much into that, because supposedly that has become, again, sensitive topics, sensitive words. But, with the woke culture, of course, goes together with all those initial things, right? So that whole initial movement, then I saw some center maybe decide, we're going to make a course more oriented for these people. Again, that's really misunderstanding Dhamma. The proper Dhamma is not about that. It's not about the ego and people's personal issues, because at the end you are there to learn that nothing is personal. So you are exactly there to humble down with your own very narcissistic, self-centered nature, self-absorbed, and all your own whatever principles, made-up principles in your own head, in that mind that has gone that way. Because the point is to detach from all that, and that is what Vipassana is about. So when some place start to say, okay, let's organize maybe a course more specifically for these people, but then it got to the point, once I heard some conversation from some center teacher and management with the whole new thing and this whole transgender claim, and as these people with their initials keep adding more initials only to confirm the madness that this society is evolving into. More and more madness, of course, can't help it. Vicious cycle of the mind defilement going, dark from dark to darker. Then there's a point where, the whole non-binary thing, or identify as this or that, whatever crazy thing you think you are, and feel entitled to be like that. So there was a point where we say, but you see, that's where exactly at some point life as Dhamma shows when it goes too far in madness. Okay, so how do we do, again, as the classic issue in society with the bathroom? You're in a Dhamma center, you're supposed to, exactly by tradition, for a reason, separate men and women. Here we go. The whole nonsense thing. Oh, but okay, now we have maybe transgenders or we have not, fully operated transgender, or we, and what about these people who identify as this and that and that? Which side are we going to go? Or do we need to make now suddenly a new third, like part of a center? You realize the madness? That is exactly what life shows you when it goes too far in complete madness, insanity, in the mind defilements. Moha, so many percent. So that are two aspects. And then exactly, again, where do you find these issues? Only mostly in North American culture. So there's a reason for that, and that's why you see North America being in the situation that it is now. So time for self-checkup and drop the whole self-centered, narcissistic way to look at things, and feeling so entitled in that madness, and hopefully can manage to reverse back. Anyway, that's the point, basically. A Vipassana center will be a place to reverse all that, exactly, to learn to detach from all that, and to learn about no me, no I, not about me. Life is not about me and my ways and the way I look at myself, or that I consider myself, and all this. The point is, of course, to become a wise being like that, and to learn the detachment from that huge conceited ego, and especially in that culture. And then when you have people like that who have that level of awareness, you can create a good center with a good Sangha mentality, where, as I said, people will focus on the four Brahma Viharas. It's more about the others than me first and my ways, exactly to make a place, a Dhamma center, run properly and smoothly for the right Dhamma values, like that. But what I meant to say earlier about what Ubakin was saying to Goenka, and what is known about the exchange and Ubakin, and basically when people ask the question if they were arahant, of course, they are not arahant like that, because I think actually if you become an arahant, you become automatically a monk anyway, or a nun. There is a famous young nun actually in Myanmar that I met also. Again, it shows, and she has that similar story as I referred to. When you have the paramis, and it get triggers one day, no matter your age, when you start to read proper Dhamma, then everything starts. And she's she was already that high before 30 years old. Of course, now she's very popular, has a very nice meditation center, which I would encourage people to go to, but Myanmar is not so good now. Anyway, so the thing with Ubakin, when people ask if they were Arahat, and ultimately they mean that, they compare to Bodhisattva, right? Again, the definition of a Bodhisattva, which is more known in Mahayana tradition, but Bodhisattva means actually that you somewhat make the vow not to become an Arahant, so you can be reincarnated again and again and again to help as many people as possible to reach enlightenment, or to reach high, to share the Dhamma to as many people as possible over new life and new life and new life, like this, until the next Buddha, great Buddha, Sammasambuddha. So that is to say that people mean that, like Goenka explained at in a sense that he says, yes, you feel very deep, you are basically in a jhanas, you are very high, deep, in concentration, in awareness, and also with upekkha, but you feel that there's a gate there, but the gate doesn't open to go on the other side, maybe like full nibbana or arahantship or whatever. And so that way. And they mean that also Hubakinan mentioned something like that his point was also to help as many people, that way, to discover Dhamma, to practice seriously Dhamma, and to reach higher on the path. So it may sound like maybe Ubakin and Goenka were not meant to become Arhat, like to be done, finished with any existence at the end of their life, but to come back again and again. And that is basically that mentality of saying we want to keep spreading Dhamma the most to as many as possible for a very long time. Many lives. And so in that sense, maybe that's what gives that mentality that in that organization, that when you reach really high and you become Arya or not, but and if you are meant to reach the highest, and maybe that is your goal, to become an Arahat, then this organization doesn't feel supportive for you for that, and they would rather see you go basically and do your own thing, sure, like they say many times in a very arrogant way, as I've experienced sometimes. Okay, go, yeah. And of course there is at some point Goenka himself saying in one discourse that when people mean that maybe they have experienced Nibbana, because that's the problem, of course, many people will claim to have experienced Nibbana, to be Arya, but of course very few are, as it is known. But if somebody will mention that to him, most of the time he will say, okay, then good for you, and okay, then you can go and practice. So maybe there is some of that, again, in that organization. Whatever. So anyway, as far as, to conclude that, as far as Vipassana is concerned, and especially for the Western mind, actually, I think the Goenka Vipassana courses are very good. They're the real deal. Goenka was the real deal. It worked for me. And it's well adapted to some way the modern path. Again, some people will criticize the vocabulary that Goenka used. Of course, it was from another generation, another culture, back in the days. Sometimes they think his vocabulary should be updated to modern terms, modern way, but again, that's the tradition, that's Goenka tradition, and that's his discourses, and I think they are really good enough for the main point, for Vipassana and Dhamma. So I think Goenka Vipassana is the real deal, and that will exactly take you through that surgery of the mind to discover your own mind, your own nature, if you practice properly. And again, the properly means also, like he explained different times, but try not to have your monkey mind too involved with your very typical Western, arrogant, conceited ego that thinks it knows better already and that it can interpret things its own way and can challenge some of the knowledge or what it says. Again, you give 10 days of that proper practice, objective practice, and then after that, yes, you can have your opinion and whatever you think. And as we see in so many videos online about people giving their take on that course, but during the 10-day, understand that you don't need to actually ask any question, because again, whatever happens is the deeper practice, like it's like a deep psychotherapy in one way, to try to go in your own nature at the depth of your mind and anything that shows up is within you, is part of you, is what you are. So there's nothing again to blame on this or that or outside, and it's how it is right then at that moment, and that's your own psychology. And yeah, try to be a grown-up person to accept that for what it is, and that's where you're at, and that's how you actually learn to really grow and become much more aware, and hopefully develop real wisdom to become a wise being. And of course learning about upekkha, awareness and upekkha, the two best quality, and upekkha is the key to the goal for the ones who are meant to and who really mean to go to the farther shore. So upekkha, equanimity, means what it means, to accept things for what they are, yatha bhuta, and just be fine, be neutral, and learning that it's not about your own emotions, and so you just accept that reality. So actually you don't really need to have any questions, because the practice itself is that true let go, true surrender to life, to reality, for what it is. And that, if you can keep equanimous really with awareness, will take very, very far in the discovery of human nature, human mind in general, human psychology in general, and your own, of course, and could give you many, many answers without asking. And you don't need to ask, because answers will come in time. Whatever happens, you don't need to have an answer, an explanation right now. If you practice seriously and you go on practicing seriously, regularly, all the time, everything will come when it's meant to, naturally. And that's the way things have to come naturally. Don't force them, don't push them, but you will have all the answers you need in time if you dedicate to proper practice, which is again the most simple as always. Just relax, focus, develop concentration with a calm mind, and only have awareness and equanimity, and that will take you to the end, and everything will be fine with that.